Let's move on to talking about conflict resolution a bit. And you've got, I think you have new stuff to go behind tab 3 on conflict resolution. We touched on that. You know, Alex, the last time we met, Alex Avila gave a presentation on conflict resolution. And we didn't talk a lot about the biblical principles of conflict resolution, although he referred to them. And so I want to quickly go through those. I gave you a pamphlet. Do you all remember the pamphlet I gave you on these? If you don't have them, there are a few on the table. Everybody should have one. It should be in your toolkit as a team leader, because this lays out the process of biblical conflict resolution. And we're only going to hit the kind of the foundational ones this morning. The pamphlet contains all of them. But we're going to talk about what Peacemaker, this comes from Peacemaker Ministries. How many of you have heard of Peacemaker Ministries? Yeah, anybody? It is a great ministry. It's based in Seattle, Washington. It's started by a guy named Ken Sandy. And they are worldwide now, and they do a lot of training on peace and reconciliation, especially among churches and church staffs. And their goal, Ken is a lawyer, and many of the people who facilitate these peacemaking mediations and such are attorneys, because they see what happens when people go to court, how families are torn apart and relationships are destroyed. And that Ken became convicted that that is not God's way. That is not the way God's people should resolve conflict. And out of that came this peacemaking process. And the 4 G's, the first one you see up there is glorify God. When conflict happens, is that the first thing you think about? Probably not. But the first thing you should think about, the first question you should ask, whether you're the person in conflict or whether you're the team leader trying to help. Oh, I'm sorry. I forget that I can't move away from the mic. I'm not a standstill person. Whether you're the person in conflict or the team leader trying to help team members resolve it, you need to know what the process is, and you need to step back and pray, and you need to think it through and think, how can God be glorified in this conflict? Now, the glory to God doesn't come from the conflict. The glory to God comes from the resolution and reconciliation of the matter. So unless it's resolved, and unless the parties are reconciled, the ultimate glory is not being given to God. So think it through and pray it through, and often God will show you these are the steps that will lead to reconciliation and resolution, and I will be glorified in the process. And if that's based on 1 Corinthians 10:31, which says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. All. That includes resolving conflict. And when you glorify God, it opens up a surprising option when you resolve to do that. And that option is to overlook it. Many times the reason we are unwilling or unable to just let something pass is because our pride has been injured. Not because the wrong is so grievous or dangerous to anybody, but because our pride is hurt. So that's the first place you have to look. And if you read Proverbs 19:11, it says, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. So ultimately it is to the glory of God to overlook an offense. Now, there are times when that is not the right course of action. Some things cannot be overlooked. If it's dangerous, if there's an element of danger, if it's dishonoring to God, whatever the behavior or the situation, if it's destroying or damaging a relationship, then you can't just let it pass. You can't just overlook it. So then that takes step 2. Step 1, you've resolved that God needs to be glorified through this process. And then you have decided, prayerfully, examining your heart to be sure what your motives are, you've decided that this cannot be overlooked. And really, that's the temptation. It's how much easier, really, many times, is it to overlook. and just nurse our hurt pride. So it can't be overlooked. So then the next step is, the next G is get the log out. Takes you right to Matthew 7:3-5. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there's a big log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Notice that wording. Take out the speck in your own eye, and then you will see clearly. When you have something in your eye, what happens to your vision? Yeah, it's distorted. It's blurred. You're not seeing clearly. So, what does a log or a speck in your eye look like? How would you recognize a speck or a log? Usually, you can look for a critical attitude on your part. Do I have a critical attitude? If you find yourself having critical attitude, and some of us are kind of wired that way, especially if you happen to have high beaver characteristics, because you're a perfectionist, and that sort of leads naturally to a critical attitude. So that's the first place you have to look. And if you don't recognize it and deal with it, a critical attitude escalates into sinful words, sinful actions, gossiping, telling a lie, whatever it is. But the foundation is usually a critical attitude that has not been yielded before God. So that's step 2, glorify God, then get the log out. Then the next step, I bet you can all tell me. What's the next one? I mean, it tells us in Matthew 18:15, gently restore. And the word gently is actually in the Bible verse, gently. I think it's in the Galatians Bible verse. But the Matthew 18:15 is, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. Now, on a mission field, I think about condensing all of this into a 2-week mission trip, this whole process. Okay, conflict happens. You're the team leader. You may not be involved, but you are involved because you're the team leader. You know it's out there. So what is the first thing that you personally would do? Oh, sorry, Judy. What would you personally do first if you know there's conflict between team members? Pray. And ask God what? How He can be glorified through this situation. Okay. All right. Then you need to counsel both parties to examine their hearts. You can offer to pray with them. Certainly tell them you'll be praying for them, that they'll be able to honestly explore their own heart, their own thoughts, and their own emotions. But you're going to have to step in, most likely. And I won't tell you that. We'll get to that later. You can figure out some of that out for yourselves. Okay, so go and gently restore. That's the hard one. That's where you have to sit face to face with somebody. So you have to know how to do that. And that is a process as well. And it's a godly process if it's done correctly. Then the 4th G, this happens if you've done the first 3, the situation is no better. And that is to go and be reconciled. And that is different than gently restoring. Gently restoring involves going as well, because you need to speak with the person. But go and be reconciled means that you now need to, you haven't been successful. With either your heart isn't right or the recipient's heart isn't right. And that happens. People aren't always in the same place in these processes. So then you need to take this is referring specifically to the church elders and such. But if this happens on a mission team, hopefully you have identified a couple of spiritually mature people on the team who can pray with you about this and join you if that needs to be what happens in the process. But go and be reconciled. That means everything is forgiven. You can have you can go and gently restore and come back to a good working relationship with the person, but there may not really be full reconciliation. You're kind of just, okay, we'll get along. But for really heart reconciliation and true forgiveness, you have to get to the reconciliation point. And if you look at that Peacemaker material, you'll see that there are the 7 A's of confession. When you're before God looking for the log in your eye, it's not just, I'm sorry. There's a process. And then there are 4 promises of forgiveness that are also a part of it. Forgiveness is also a process. Have you ever said and believed in your heart, said to someone, I forgive you, when they've wronged you? And you really meant it, you really thought you did, but then the next time that person does anything that ticks you off a little bit, are you starting just with that little tick off? Probably not. You're probably going, you pull it back. You bring it back up. So with the 4 promises, one of the 4 promises of forgiveness is, I will not bring this back up, and I will not continue to hold this against you. And one of the other promises is, this is not a temporary pardon. You can't violate probation and have this forgiveness taken. God doesn't give us temporary pardons, does he? He fully forgives, and that's our goal. Total forgiveness and reconciliation. Any comments or questions about this? I mean, this is really like a 3-day seminar, this whole conflict. In the material that you should have in front of you, you have the first you should have the first chapter of the Peacemaker book. Baker Bookhouse, the publisher, made that chapter available for downloading, and so we printed it off for you, and please read it. And you'll probably find that you would like to go and get the book and read all the rest of it. Very valuable information.